What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. I appreciate you dropping back in. Today we're out here on my home lake here in Hanover, Pennsylvania, Lake Marburg, also known as Cadora State Park. We're out here taking advantage of the nice weather. Got a nice 75-degree day, so fishing is a little slow this time of year. It's drawn down, as you guys can see in the background, excessively. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna do a couple bait breakdowns just to cover the basics. I got some jerk baits, jigs, swim baits. We'll see what else we get into. So follow along and we'll get into it. All right, guys. So jerkbait 101. Now, there are tons of different jerk baits on the market. You got single hook ones, roll micro ones, you got double hook ones, you got triple hook ones. So we're gonna focus on double hook and triple hooks, even though I don't have them tied on, and I'll explain both of them for you. All right, so just got a double hook jerk bait tied on here. Now for a setup, my go-to is a 7-foot medium. I like throwing mine on a bait caster. Some people throw them on a spinning reel. I like throwing mine on a bait caster, 7-foot medium action. Throw it on 12-pound fluorocarbon. And the reel is one of the most important components. Now, yes, you can throw a 6-6, you can throw a 7-to-1, you can throw a 7-3-to-1, you can throw an 8-to-1. My ideal gear ratio for reels is a 7-1-to-1. Now, once you get your bait out there, give it a few cranks to get it down to depth. It's one of the most important steps of jerkbait fishing. And when you get it down there, you're just gonna snap it, okay? I usually do 1 snap, then I'll do 2, go back to 1, and I'll go 2, 2, stop it, let it sit for a few seconds, start working it again. And you don't have to do the same thing. You just want to, sometimes they want it really fast, sometimes they want it really, really slow. During the winter months, throwing a jerk bait, you can let it sit for 10-15 seconds on a pause, and they'll hit it eventually right before your next snap. And sometimes they'll hit it as soon as you start that next snap, and they see it twitch the slightest, they'll hit it. So snap it and just keep working it. Now, the reason behind the high-speed reel is every time you snap it, you're bringing slack in, and the rod is doing the work. But you don't want to have to sit there and crank a couple times until you get tight. You want a high-speed reel, that way when you snap it, and you have that slack, 1 turn of the reel, and I'm back tight to that bait. If I do 2 snaps, 2 turns, and I'm back tight to that bait. Now, some guys will, you know, work it really, really fast, and there are times when that works. But for right now, we're just talking a slow retrieve. Okay, so again, throw it out there, get it down to depth, snap it, reel, get tight. Snap it, reel, get tight. Now, if you want to get a little bit extra tight on that, get 2 snaps. Reel again, get tight. And you don't want to reel, you want the reel to do the work, so you want to do 1 turn of the handle to get it back tight to that bait. But you don't want to do it too much to where you start reeling the bait back in. After those twitches, you want that bait to sit there until you are ready to make your next twitch. So, reel it, twitch, tight, twitch it twice. And you can let it sit, you know, 4 or 5 seconds. And you can do it again. You can do 3 quick twitches. Let it sit for 2 seconds. Twitch it 1 more time, and then let it sit for 10. You want to change it up every single time until you figure them out. And now if you're working that bait and you're just working it as fast as you can, and you're getting bit on every single cast, keep doing it. Don't change it if they're biting. If they're biting, keep doing whatever you're doing. Now, when they're very, very aggressive, I know up here on the East Coast in the northern states, Maryland, Pennsylvania, New York, Jersey, things like that, when the water gets really, really cold on the river systems in the area, you can catch giant smallmouth by throwing a jerkbait, and you'll be working it as fast as you physically can, and that's how they want it. Now, I have a very, I don't want to say dull color, but it's a translucent color, little gold towards the front, purple on the back. The sun is high in the sky, very clear water. I want something translucent, and I want something that's going to look extremely natural. Now, if the bait fish were a little bit bigger, and you can still throw a 3-hook jerkbait even when they're smaller bait, or when you're seeing smaller bait, they will still eat it. But typically around here, the bait that they're busting on, the bait that they're following, is very, very small, so I'm using a smaller jerkbait. I rarely will go smaller than this in a bigger body of water, just because you still want something that is going to look like a meal to them. This is just a regular jerkbait. It's not a deep diver or anything like that. Now, if you're throwing a 3-hook jerkbait, typically they're going to be about an inch and a half longer than this. I'm a firm believer in presentation over color. So this bait here, there might be a color that would work a little bit better, but if somebody's throwing the other color that mimics closer to the bait fish that they're eating, but it's not being worked right and it doesn't look natural in the water, they're not going to eat it. Now, this color might not be exactly what they're eating, but if I can mimic the bait fish and I can do everything right and present this properly, they're going to eat it. Now, as I said, I throw on 12-pound fluorocarbon. You can throw on 8-pound, or excuse me, 10-pound. 10-pound, you'll get it down a little bit deeper. It is nicer in some cases. However, my success rate has not gone up or down if I've moved to 14-pound versus 10-pound. Now, if you're in a body of water and they are very, very pressured fish, yes, going to 10-pound might not be a bad idea, not because of getting it down deeper, but just because they're a lot more pressured, so being a little bit more finesse might be the ticket to getting bit. Now, some guys, they do like a 6'10" or a 6'9" for rod length for jerkbait. I don't mind it. 6'10s are really nice because they're usually, the butt of the rod is a little bit shorter than a 7-foot, so you have that extra space for when you're snapping that bait. The downside in what I have found, what works for me, is losing the casting distance. I like being able to make a very, very long cast, and the difference between a 6'10" and a 7-foot, it might only be 5 feet difference on your overall cast, but that's what I'm looking for. That 5 feet can make the difference between you being able to get to the fish, or maybe the fish are, maybe with a 6'10" you're throwing it at a fish or a school of fish, and you're landing it right on top of it, and they're not even looking at it because it's hitting right on top of them. If you have a little bit longer rod to where you can get past them, get that bait down and start working it, so that by the time it gets to them, you can start snapping it and working the bait, they might hit it. So I like having that little bit of extra rod length to give me that casting distance. Now, there are downsides to a 7-foot rod over a 6'10". As I was saying, with a jerkbait rod, an ideal jerkbait rod, from the back of the reel to the end of the rod, you want it to be as short as possible, because when you're out there and you're snapping down, you don't want this piece here of the rod. You don't want it hitting your body. You don't want it hitting your arm. Now, some rods, I've thrown some 610s, I've thrown some 7-footers, where this here is even longer than this. So yes, it's still a medium action rod. It might be a 610, a 7-foot, but it's not the most ideal rod because you can't snap it just because of that butt of the rod being a little bit longer. I do love the wind grip. Abu Garcia does a great job. They have a lot of different options with the wind grip. They have this here's an Abu Garcia Roxani. The Veritas, they have a LTD edition that comes with the wind grip. So they have a lot of options. Now, is it necessary? No. Do you need a rod that has a wind grip? Absolutely not. Do some people hate wind grips? Absolutely. I'm not telling you guys go out and buy a jerkbait rod with a wind grip. I'm just saying it is what I like. That's what I throw. Now, hang this up. We're gonna discuss a few things. Now, jerkbaits. Probably my favorite place to throw a jerkbait. There's two different types of structure. Okay, as you can see here along this side, this is all riprap. Okay, real big rock down that way. You can see obviously majority of the bank is slate rock, smaller rock, but anytime you have riprap with bigger than normal rocks, boulders, things like that, that's where I'm gonna throw a jerkbait. Now, when you're on a boat, if we're coming out of this out of this cove here and we get to this point, I'm gonna make a very long cast down the side of this riprap here. Okay, I'm gonna make a very long cast down this way. I'm gonna start working that bait back. Now I'm gonna take the boat out a little bit more, get a little bit of a different angle. It might be a 45-degree angle. I'm gonna work that bait back down that riprap. If I don't get anything, might circle around to the other side as I'm working the bank, get down towards where I was throwing, throw back up this way, and work it back down. On the back side of the riprap, might move off a little bit at a 45, throw back towards where I'm standing now, and keep working that bait. You have to break the structure down because you don't know where they're sitting. They might want the bait coming from their right to their left, or they might want the bait coming from their left to the right. If they're sitting here and they're facing that way, and I throw out in front of them and I'm working it back and they can see it coming to them, most likely they're gonna hit it. If it's presented right, if there's a lot of factors that go into it, if it's presented right and everything like that. Now, if he's facing me this way, and I'm not talking sight fishing, I'm just saying if the scenario presented, the fish was that I didn't know was there, was looking this way, and I'm throwing from here down. If I'm working that bait from behind him, he's not going to see that until it gets to the point to where his peripheral vision catches that bait, and it might catch his attention. But if it's a very, very aggressive retrieve, he might not have enough time to react. Now, that same fish looking this way, if I position the boat down on the other side and I throw up here in front of him and he sees that bait coming right towards his face from 6 to 8 feet out, obviously you can see it's very, very clear water here. And a lot of times when you're working that bait and you work it a couple feet in front of him, when it gets to him and you pause it, that next twitch is going to hit a reaction bite and he's going to hit it. And the difference between catching that fish and not catching that fish was being on this side or the other side. And it's something so important that you have to pay attention to, because guys will come by, they'll work this whole riprap, they'll work it down, they won't catch a single thing, and they'll keep going and on to the next one. Now the next guy might come through, do the same exact thing, but when he gets to the backside, he might flip around, and I'm not saying work exactly where he did all the way back up, but he might stop, might go off a little bit, throw back at the different angles and things like that I was saying, and he might catch 1 or 2, 3, 4, 5 fish that the previous guy that just went through didn't catch simply because it wasn't presented how they wanted it to, or maybe they didn't have enough time to look at it. So all those things play into jerkbait fishing, and it plays into majority of baits. You want to break down the body of water that you're fishing on. If you're going to be fishing brush, you want to break it down. You might be rolling up on fish on brush piles in 10 feet of water, and then you get to a brush pile in 15 feet of water and there's no fish on it. You might find another one on the other side of the lake in 10 feet of water and they might be sitting on it. Find another one in 12, 13. You might find one in 20 and there's no fish on it. So you have to be very, very thorough in what you're looking for. Pay attention when you find fish. Pay attention what they're sitting on. If they're sitting on riprap like this. So on this side, you can see how the sun's hitting the rocks. On this side over here, it's a little bit shaded, okay? So a really, really translucent bait like this, it might be working like crazy over here, but I could go over there and start throwing it, and the simple fact of that being in the shade and the sun not being able to hit that bait right and give the flash like it does over here, it might not work over there. So you can switch to, you might want to switch to a darker color. And for jerkbaits, I like fishing them in clear water. There are some people that fish them in dirty water. I like fishing them in really clear water. Typically really cold water. And I'm talking, when I say really cold, middle of the winter around here, we're looking 40, mid 40s, low 40s for water temperature. Water temperature now, we're still in the low 60s, I believe. So it isn't as cold as it's gonna be, but it is colder water. 2 months ago, the water was 80 some degrees. Okay, we're in the fall transition. We've had really, really cold days, and then this week, and I believe the entire next week, is supposed to be in the 70s. So you might have to readjust. Now, we broke down the riprap. The other type of structure that I like throwing jerkbaits around is brush piles in particular. And some people are going to be scared to, and that's fine. You have to be very careful. Obviously, if you've got branches and things like that sticking up off of the brush pile, you don't want to be running a 3-hook jerkbait by it, you know, a $20 jerkbait, you know, and snagging on that, and that bait's 15 feet of water, because you're probably not going to get that bait back. But brush piles have produced very, very well for me. I've enjoyed them for jerkbait fishing. I like shallow brush piles, especially when the fall transition, excuse me, hits in full swing, because they're already pushed up back up onto the bank. They're already chasing bait, but they still want to be tight to something. Okay, riprap, I love throwing crankbaits and jerkbaits. Rocks, big rocks like this hold heat very, very well. So after a really cold night, the next morning it might be tough, but if there's something like this that holds heat, you might roll up on it, there might be 10 fish sitting on it. But brush piles in, I would say 10 feet or less, I do enjoy throwing a jerkbait on as well. And again, be careful if the top of that brush pile is, say, 7 feet deep. You don't want to be throwing a deep diving crankbait that dives to 10 feet, because you're going to be getting up in that brush pile. But if you have a jerkbait like the one I'm throwing, where its dive depth is between 4 and 7 feet, that's going to be ideal. Because in really, really clear water, if they're 7 feet deep sitting on top of that brush pile, and I bring a jerkbait by, and say that jerkbait's only to 4 feet, in this water you can see, I can see 8 feet easily. So they'll be able to see it without a problem. And if you're presenting it right, you're going to get a reaction strike, and they will come get it. I've had fish come up. I've thrown a deep diving jerkbait, and I was diving it to 9-10 feet, throwing it in 20 feet of water, and I've had them fish sitting in 17, and they come up to 10 feet to get that bait. So there's Those are all factors that play into jerkbait fishing. Back to talking about the bait itself, okay? Now a jerkbait like this has 2 hooks, okay? When I snap that bait and I pause it, it's gonna sit, typically it's gonna sit a little bit more horizontal than a 3-hook bait would, okay? So it might sit like that. So if they're being very, very stingy on what they're biting, or you're fishing a very, very pressured body of water and they're just nipping at that bait, and you find where you're getting bit on the jerkbait but you're not connecting with fish, they might just be nipping. When that bait freezes, they might be nipping at the back of that, okay? And they only have this 1 hook that they can get, okay? Now on a 3-hook bait, it's going to be a little bit longer. That 3-hook bait is going to sit, when you pause it, it's going to sit vertical a little bit more than a 2-hook bait. It's going to be a little bit more front heavy, okay? So now when that bait sits like that, and you can just imagine this hooks up a little bit, you have a 3rd hook here in the middle. Now they have, if they're just nipping at it, they've got this hook here, they've got this hook in the middle, and then they would have the back hook of the one in the front. So now there's 3 points that they could connect with if they're being very, very careful, and that might be the difference between the baits. And again, you want to match the hatch. So, you know, if they're eating small 2 to 3 inch bait fish like this, you want to throw a smaller bait. You don't want to be throwing a 6-inch mag draft in a lake where the bait fish are eating, there's nothing above 2 inches long, and you're throwing a 6-inch mag draft. But even if they're eating smaller bait fish, but you're throwing a jerk bait and you're working it back and forth and they're just nipping at it, bumping up to a 3-hook bait where there's more hooks exposed when that bait pauses, it could be the difference between you catching a lot of fish and you only catching 1 or 2. So something as simple as that, that a lot of people overlook, can really help you. So you don't need to you don't need to buy the most expensive jerkbait on the market. You don't. Colors are great, yes, I get it. Action is also very important, okay? So when you're working that bait, you want a jerkbait that when you pause it, if you twitch it and you pause it, when that bait, right before it settles, you want that bait to roll like this, and then it'll settle itself back over. You want a jerkbait that'll roll over because it really looks like a dying bait fish. So as always, I appreciate you guys tuning in. If you enjoyed the video, drop a like, drop a subscribe if you would like to follow along. I greatly appreciate it. Let me know what you guys want to see in the future, and we'll see you on the next one.